Good evening, everyone. Good to see you again. This evening we are looking at a very interesting subject, but it's very brief. Title is very brief. We're looking at what the church is, but the title is The Remnant Church. The Remnant Church. Let me start by sharing you what happened to me. I was privileged to preach at a church in Manhattan, and we were sitting at the Sabbath school class, and one of our visitors, who was not Seventh-day Adventist, was bored and candid enough and said, "Why are you Seventh-day Adventists think that you're so special? Why do you think you're above the rest of the churches, and you think you have a particular message, and you think you're preaching a unique message that others don't preach?" There was silence for a moment, but reluctantly I raised up my hand. I said, "Hey, look, my good brother, there has always been two churches from the beginning, all the way going back to the Garden of Eden." So I started with the story of Cain and Abel. I said, listen, the two brothers, Abel worshipped the way God had prescribed that they should worship. And that was a true church. But Cain did not worship according to what God had said. And that was a false church. So I brought him down to the edges, to the history of the church. I said, look, at the time of pagan Rome baptized itself into Christianity and called itself the Roman Catholic Church. And people saw that the way they were worshiping, their doctrines were not in line with biblical truth. So they started a revolution, what we call in the Christian circles, the Protestant movement. It was around 1517 when Martin Luther stood up and said, we have to bring this to the attention of the church and to the world. What we are being taught is not according to the Bible. So Luther began a movement, and his followers were called the Lutherans. Those are the first group that came out of the Catholic Church. And then in the 1520s, there's a gentleman called Zwingli. He started the Reformed Church. From the Reformed Church came the Anabaptists that came about 1525. And then after the Anabaptists, we find a man called John Knox, who started the Presbyterian Church. And after the Presbyterian Church became the Baptists in the 1600s. So from 1600s to about mid-1800s, the Baptist Church reigned. And then a group of people, a lady called Ellen White and her family, and a group of people that came out of the Baptist Church because they were now studying the Bible. And they called themselves Adventists at the beginning, not Seventh-day Adventists. They called themselves Adventists. But later they came to discover the truth about the Sabbath, and they called themselves Seventh-day Adventists. And from 1844, when this particular message that Adventists started preaching, all the way going onwards up to this time, there's never been another church that came out of the Seventh-day Adventists. So the Seventh-day Adventists is the Remnant Church. But before we talk about what the remnant is, the word remnant is easy to understand, easy to explain, but what is the church? Now the Bible gives a definition of the church, but before we go there, what makes somebody decide what church congregation they will join? What makes somebody decide, what's the basis upon which somebody makes a decision to join a church congregation? Is it the size of the church? Some follow the level of excitement. So there's so many different ways why people join churches, but if you have noticed, on these churches that we're walking on, you are walking on the street and look at the names. Come get your miracle church. You know, they're just prying on your curiosity so you can want to go there and see what miracles they have. I saw one church that says strictly biblical teaching church, and just beneath that it said Sunday service, Sunday 9 a.m. Now if it's a strictly biblical church, how come they worship on Sunday? That's something to think about. So let's go to the definition. What does the Bible say the church is? In 1 Timothy, book of 1 Timothy chapter 3, 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verses 14 and 15, it says, "These things write I unto thee, hoping to come unto thee shortly." That's Paul writing to young Timothy. "But I tarry long, that thou mayest know that how oughtest to behave thyself in the house of God." Now let's pause right there. We must be particular. When you read the Bible, when you read a Bible verse, be particular with the words. Don't just cruise through the verse. So that's number one. In the house of God, which is the church of the living God. Why the stress? Living God, house of God, living God, the pillar and ground of the truth. Are we together? That's the definition of the church. The church is the pillar that holds the truth. The pillar rests on the foundation. Jesus Christ is the foundation of the church, and the pillar upholds the truth of the church. Listen to me. Bible does identify the church that will exist in the last days. The Bible does identify that. It points it out very clearly. Let's go to Revelation chapter 14. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 12. And I'll read in your hearing. "Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus." Now, notice now, before I explain verse 12, beginning verses 9 to 11, for Revelation chapter 14 gives you a description of a people who will reject the message that this church will preach. Did you hear me? Verses 9 to 11 gives a description of the people who will reject the message that this last day church will preach. But now, there are two features there that comes out in that verse. One, they obey the commandments of God. And two, they have the faith of Jesus. Why does the Bible say faith of Jesus and not faith like Jesus, or the faith like that of Jesus? In the Garden of Gethsemane, just before Christ went up to the cross, he had to persevere. He had to have faith in God. He could not have gone through the Gethsemane experience if he did not have faith in God. Jesus didn't just walk up to Gethsemane. Jesus didn't just walk up to the cross like, "I'm going to do it because I am Jesus, I am God and man. I'm just going to do it." He exercised faith in his Father. 3 times he went back to where the disciples were. 3 times. And he came back until he finally said, "I'm going to have faith in my Father, and I'm going to go through this experience." That is the faith that this church will have. A faith of Jesus. And they will deny anything. Even at the time, at dying for their faith, dying for their master. The faith of Jesus. These people will uphold the commandments of God. And we are talking here about the Decalogue, the 10 commandments that God has given to his people. Now, you will find some churches, some church congregations, and they'll tell you that the 10 commandments were nailed to the cross. The 10 commandments were done away with at the cross. Now, you must question that church, because this is a description of the church, the 2 features that will be seen in the church that will live in the last days. They will obey the commandments of God, and they will have the faith of Jesus. If somebody tell you that the commandments were nailed to the cross, you must question that man. Why? Because the description is given here. And coming back to the faith of Jesus, these people make deliberate choices to obey God, or to die rather than disobey the commandments of God. Moving on. I want you to listen to me very carefully. In the book of Revelation, there's so much symbolism, right? There are 2 women in the book of Revelation. One in chapter 12 and another one in chapter 17. A woman in prophecy, in Revelation, symbolizes a church. A woman symbolizes a church. Now, let's read Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1. Now, John is writing what he saw. Chapter 12 and verse 1 of the book of Revelation. And there appeared a great wonder in the heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. What do we see there? Three things. A crown of stars, and the sun that is clothing her, and the moon under her feet. And now if you read Genesis chapter 1 and 14, the Bible says, let there be lights. Lights in plural. Meaning that is when God was creating these three lights. The sun, the moon, and the stars. And these things are in the heavens. Paul talks about the three heavens. The first one is this, what we know as atmosphere. And then we have what we have, the celestial, where we have the sun, the moon, and stars. That's the second heavens. And the third heavens is where God dwells. So God said, let there be lights, meaning that he created these things. And this woman has all the three lights. What does it tell us? It means that this is God's church. That's how we could look at this woman and say, this is God's church. Because he is clothed with the sun. He has the moon under her feet. And the stars, a crown of stars on her head. So this is God's church. So we have three lights. And she has all of them. So who clothed her? God clothed her. He clothed her with his creation. The sun, the moon, and the stars. Because it is his church. And if you look at it in a spiritual sense, in rather another perspective, who is the light of the world? Jesus Christ is the light of the world. John says Christ is the light of the world. And now God created these lights, natural lights, and Jesus Christ, if you look at it, is the light of the world. So he gives light to his church. And the church brings out, exemplifies this light to all the world. And that's how you identify that this is God's church. Now this woman, we can remove the sun and pick and look into her heart to see what is in her heart, the corruptness in her heart. But we cannot see that because the sun is clothing her. The sun, the S-U-N, sun, or S-O-N, sun of righteousness. Christ is covering her. So for us to know who she really is, we have to look at Christ. Because she reflects Christ. Now the same chapter 12, let's look at verse 17. Verse 17, chapter 12 of Revelation. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. So you see now that 12 verse 17 ties with the description of the church that I gave earlier. Are we together? The same two features are coming out again. The commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. It's the same repetition. Now, let me just break it down a little bit. Verse 17. You notice that the dragon is angry with this church. The dragon is angry with this church. Why? Because it's God's church. And he goes to make war with a remnant of this church. Now, I mentioned from 1844 coming onwards to present time, the Seventh-day Adventists has existed. That's almost 170 years this month. So the people, the pioneers of this movement are not with us today. But the dragon, the devil, is making war with the remnant of our seed. We are the remnant of them. But these people, just like those that founded this movement, they have a testimony of Jesus. What is a testimony? What is the legal definition of the word testimony? When you sit in court, they call you in court, the judge is sitting there, your lawyer is sitting there, and the lawyer of the defendant is sitting there. And you sit in court, you are expected to give a testimony. You're expected to testify And what you can say is only the truth and nothing else but the truth. So you're testifying, right? So the lives of these people, this church, members of this church, their kind of lives they live testifies that this is God's church. It testifies to the world that these are God's people. Now let's go to the other church. Revelation chapter 17 and verse 4. There are two churches. Revelation chapter 17 and verse 4. And the woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. Now stop right there. Have you noticed something with these two women? Both of them are clothed. Are we together? Both of them are clothed. They're covered. The other one with the sun, the moon under her feet, and the stars on her head. But this one, the Bible says, she's arrayed. She's covered in purple and scarlet color, and decked with gold and precious stones. So where does her light come from? Where does her light? Because the church must give light. The church must give light to this dark world. Sin has darkened this world. So the church must give light. So where does this church in chapter 17 gets her light? What she is wearing is clothes made out of cotton. And this cotton is grown from the earth. The stone, the pearls and the gold and everything that she has is from the earth. So she is not exemplifying, she's not reflecting the righteousness of God. The righteousness that she has is from her own self-righteousness. She has no connection with God whatsoever. She has no connection with heaven. She has no connection with a source of light. She has no connection with a creator. Because it's the creator that created the sun, the moon, and the stars. So there is no connection with this church. Now let's talk about the two features. The commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. I think we should have let it slide, Ray. Let's go back on that. In the book of 1 John chapter 3 and 4, the Bible gives a definition of sin. And I challenge you from Genesis to Revelation to give me another definition of sin. You will never find it. This is the only verse in the Bible that gives a definition of sin. Sin is the transgression of God's law. Lucifer transgressed God's law in heaven. The law existed before what we know today as 10 Commandments. The law did not start at Mount Sinai when Moses came down with the 2 tables of testimony, as the Bible says. The law existed because the law is a transcript of God's character. Are we together? The law is a mirror. When we look at the law, we look at God. You cannot separate him from the law. He's the law himself. Now, if you hear somebody tell you that we have to do away with the law, or the law was nailed to the cross, it means that they belong to this church in the chapter 17, that they have no connection with God because God is the law himself. How can they say they are a church and do away with the character of God? How can you do away with that? In Exodus chapter 32 and verse 15, I think to be precise, we see Moses come down, right? He comes down from Mount Sinai with 2 tables. The Bible says 2 tables of testimony. I just explained to you what testimony is. So Moses comes with a testimony, with 2 testimonies, testifying to the character of God. God is speaking to his people. This is how you should live, because this is my character. I write for you. In the book of Psalms, chapter 119, verses 144, David says, righteousness, the righteousness of thy testimonies is everlasting. The righteousness of thy testimonies is everlasting. What does that mean? Because David realizes that God is from everlasting to everlasting. God is from everlasting to everlasting. So the testimonies, thy character is everlasting. Remember the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife? When Potiphar's wife was pulling Joseph to sleep with him, what did Joseph say? How can I do this great sin? How can I do this and sin against my God? Do you understand? These people in the Bible, they understood what the law is. Are we together? They understood that the law is the character of God. Thy testimonies live forever. How can I do this and sin against my God? Breaking the law is breaking God's heart, or breaking God, or denying or rejecting God himself. Remember when I read Revelation chapter 14 and 12, the description of the church? I talked about verses 9 to 11. Those people in verses 9 to 11 who will accept the mark of the beast, they did not accept the mark of the beast because they accepted their message or whoever preached to them. They accepted the mark of the beast because they rejected the message that the other church was preaching. They rejected the message that the other church in Revelation 12 was preaching. So by default, when you reject this message, by default, you will accept the mark of the beast. And David said, against thee and thee only have I sinned. These people understood that when you sin, you're not sinning against the church. If I commit adultery, I'm not sinning against my wife. Yes, I'm breaking the vows that we made on our wedding day, but it goes further than that. Against thee, Lord, thee have I sinned, because you are the law. The law is the character of God. They understood, these people. They understood what the law is. It tells you how much or what the law embodies, what the law really means. Now listen to me. I may have friends who are not Seventh-day Adventists, but I'm going to tell them one thing. The SDA church, the Seventh-day Adventist church, is not a perfect church. It's not the perfect church. Are you with me? But it can defend every truth that it preaches. And I'm going to say that again. The Seventh-day Adventist church is not a perfect church, but it can defend every truth that it preaches biblically. Now, we're talking about the Ten Commandments and the testimony of Jesus Christ and the faith of Jesus Christ. But if you look at the Ten Commandments critically, you will see that right in the middle, there is a commandment that talks about God as creator. There's a commandment that points to God as creator. If that commandment was not there, it would have been easy to dispute the Ten Commandments. People would have been saying, oh, they just talk about me not killing, me not committing adultery, me not stealing. But the fourth commandment is the one that stops them in the tracks. Now, this commandment, in the middle of the commandments, talks about God as creator. And we talked about these three lights that are covering the church being created by God. You see the connection? You see the connection? Everything comes together. This fourth commandment that says, worship the Lord thy God on the Sabbath day, points to God as creator. So when you observe this commandment, you're telling the world, I belong to the true church of God. I belong to the church that obeys the commandments and have the testimony and testifies to the world through its character that it has the righteousness of God, the righteousness of Christ imputed and imparted. And that is why Satan will never fight the 5th commandment. He will never fight the 7th commandment. He will never fight the 10th commandment. He will never oppose the 1st commandment. He only focuses on the 4th commandment that is in the middle of the 10 commandments, because that is where God's name is mentioned as creator. And the people who worship God obey him because he is their creator. Remember now, when Lucifer rebelled in heaven, his message to the fallen angels was that no one can obey the commandments of God. They're too hard. No one can obey the commandments of God. Now, if you say you cannot obey the commandments of God, you are attacking God directly. You are attacking his character. And if look at all these politicians, try to attack his character, he will sue you and throw you in jail. But Satan had the audacity to attack God's character. So God's character is in question here. So if I or my brother or my sister obeys God and obeys this particular commandment, the 4th commandment is telling Satan that you are a liar. We can obey God because we are his creation and we are his people. So by your obedience, you become a rebuke to the devil himself. Your obedience makes you a rebuke to the devil himself, because you are telling him that you are a liar. But a time will come when the devil himself will put up a fight. He's going to arouse the powers. He will compel people to worship on the 4th Sabbath. He will arouse the heathen nations and the political leaders to persecute the people who worship God. And that time is imminent. That time is coming. But just as Christ overcame in the Garden of Gethsemane, just as Christ by faith in his Father overcame, this church will be triumphant. This church will be victorious because they have a faith of Jesus and they obey the commandments of God and have that faith that made it possible for Christ to overcome. And they will overcome. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, victory is certain for us, for as long as we obey God's commandments and testify to the world through our character that we are God's people. And we shall overcome. And talking about the pillar, when I gave the definition of the church before I finish, the pillar resting on the foundation, Christ himself. Here we find 2 pillars, the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. The commandments of God and the testimony of Jesus. Those are the 2 pillars upon which the church of God will stand to the very end of time, until we see Christ our Lord descend in the clouds of heaven to come and redeem his own. And these commandments will live forever. Even in heaven, we shall obey them because the commandments are God's character. God bless you all. God bless you all.